Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Today I'm comparing all four of the 1440p 280Hz Tandem WOLED monitors that are on the market. If you're interested in grabbing one of these monitors, and I think you should be interested because it's a great panel, this video should have all the information you need. I've extensively tested these four displays. As of making this video, these are the only four options, so it should be a comprehensive look. All four of these monitors are equipped with a 4th generation WOLED panel from LG Display. This technology was previously branded Primary RGB Tandem, referring to a change in the emissive layer that introduced a 4-stack blue-green, blue-red configuration for the first time. Today, this branding has been simplified to just Tandem WOLED, but you might see either brand used on product pages. Tandem WOLED is used across several of LG Display's monitor panels, but the focus today is on the 27-inch 2560 by 1440 280Hz version. This version is available in two official sub-variants, one with a matte coating and one with a glossy coating that we see used across the monitor options. Before I get any further, let's briefly explore these options. The Asus ROG Strix XG27AQ WMG is the first Tandem WOLED monitor I reviewed last year. It uses the glossy panel version, which Asus brand as True Black Glossy. The standout features here include Asus's Neo Proximity sensor and unlocked color controls. This is the most expensive option, priced at $650 US, and it's in high demand, often going out of stock. For this roundup, I've retested the XG27AQ WMG using the latest MCM104 firmware, as Asus have improved some things compared to my original review. Gigabyte's main Tandem WOLED offering in 2026 is the MO27Q28GR, which is also a glossy version, though Gigabyte brand this as Real Black. Some standout features on this model include a USB-C display input and a KVM switch, as well as a slim stand design. Priced at $600 US, Gigabyte's model is cheaper than Asus's in most regions and is currently easier to purchase. But that's not the only Gigabyte model on the market. There's also the MO27Q28G, which launched last year and uses the matte panel version. This display is largely identical to the MO27Q28GR except for the screen coating, and is available at the same $600 US price point. Lastly, there's the LG UltraGear 27GX700A. LG Electronics have decided to use the matte panel version from LG Display, so it's most similar to the MO27Q28G. LG's model is the only to feature hardware calibration support, and by a technicality, it's the most expensive because it has an MSRP of $850 US. However, this option is regularly available at $600 US, so you just shouldn't consider buying it during the periods where it's not on sale. Throughout this video, I'm thinking of the 27GX700A as a $600 display. The main thing you have to decide on when choosing a 280Hz Tandem WOLED is whether you want the matte version or the glossy version. There's two models available each way you go, and conveniently, Gigabyte offer basically the same monitor in both coatings if you happen to like the Gigabyte package. So which screen coating is better? Ultimately, this is subjective, and some people have really strong preferences. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, and I generally think it depends on your setup as to which coating is better. Matte tends to be the optimal choice in brighter environments or rooms where you have less control over how much direct light hits the display. Glossy tends to be better in dimmer environments or rooms where you can control lighting to give you the optimal experience. To expand a bit on this, the main advantage the glossy finish has is that it doesn't diffuse light that hits the front of the panel. At certain angles, this means that instead of incoming environmental light spreading out and hurting clarity, you get an isolated reflection and minimal impact elsewhere. This can help to preserve black levels and perceived depth. It comes at a cost though. As the panel cannot diffuse light, the screen has a mirror finish that's prone to direct reflections. The layer structure does a decent job of minimizing these reflections, so they're not terribly distracting, but anything bright is quite visibly reflected, especially when viewing darker content. The other advantage is a lack of coating grain. The way matte panels work is they add grain to the surface to diffuse incoming light. This hurts sharpness and clarity because it also slightly diffuses the light the OLED panel is emitting. It's not an overly noticeable flaw in a lot of cases, but if you look closely, glossy panels are sharper, especially when viewing text. If you can handle reflections, or if you can position the screen in a way to minimize reflections, I think the glossy screen coating looks better. The type of glossy you get with these Tandem WOLEDs in particular is excellent, and you really do get deep blacks even in moderately lit rooms. You can see why Gigabyte and Asus use marketing terms like Real Black and True Black to describe this finish. Matte coatings do have advantages in some situations though. The way they diffuse light eliminates the mirror finish and significantly reduces the visibility of reflections. Yes, it does this by spreading out light that hits the surface, but it's a great way to remove annoying distractions. Mirror finishes can be especially problematic when you have light sources directly opposite the monitor, like if you have to use the display near a window during the day. Matte coatings deal with direct lighting much better, so if you have a particularly bright room or if you find reflections extremely distracting, matte is definitely the way to go. As all four monitors pack a 280Hz refresh rate and use the same WOLED technology, all offer the same motion performance. No matter which option you choose, you'll get identical ultra-fast response times, high levels of smoothness, low levels of blur, and great clarity. I think this is a really great refresh rate for gaming in 2026. It has plenty of headroom for hardware upgrades and the use of frame generation tech, plus it's fast enough to offer a decent experience for both single and multiplayer games. It's not the fastest OLED you can get now that we have 500 and 540Hz options, but those screens are quite expensive, so 280Hz is better bang for buck. All four also offer essentially identical input lag with the processing delay below 1 millisecond. As they offer the same refresh rate, you get the same level of responsiveness. In terms of processing lag at a fixed 60Hz though, which is important if you're hooking up a game console, I found the LG model to offer the lowest input latency in that mode, whereas the Asus and Gigabyte models were about 5 milliseconds slower. Additionally, all models offer variable refresh rate support that's compatible with all GPU brands. All are listed with G-Sync compatible and FreeSync Premium Pro support, including the Gigabyte models, even though Gigabyte doesn't feature FreeSync branding on their website. Both the Asus and Gigabyte models include some gaming features that are not included on the LG model. One is black frame insertion, called ELMB on the Asus, and Ultra Clear on the Gigabyte model. These modes allow you to boost the clarity of lower refresh rates at the expense of flexibility, as they require fixed refresh rates to operate correctly. It does this by inserting one black frame in between every real frame, reducing persistence, which increases clarity. The main use case for this is to make 120Hz gaming look more like 240Hz gaming, if the game you're playing cannot be run at a higher FPS, but you still want to benefit from the high refresh rate the monitor can offer. Using black frame insertion at 120Hz looks very similar to 240Hz in practice, but you only have to run the game at 120 FPS instead of 240 FPS, so it's a potentially useful feature. The downside to this implementation on both the Asus and Gigabyte monitors is that it's highly restrictive. Normally, you'd use variable refresh rates and not worry too much about in-game FPS. If it's 180 FPS at one moment and 220 FPS the next, no big deal. But when using BFI, you need a rock-solid locked FPS and to disable VRR, so it's fiddly to get working right. And it only works at certain refresh rates like 120Hz, so while it could be a handy feature, it's not something I'd typically recommend most gamers use. Gigabyte and Asus also offer anti-flicker modes, which allow you to adjust the minimum refresh rate available while using VRR. WOLEDs are susceptible to flicker during high frame rate fluctuations as gamma is tied to the refresh rate. So if you can minimize refresh rate changes by narrowing the VRR range, you can reduce the amplitude of gamma swings. This is what these anti-flicker modes do, and it can help to reduce the severity of OLED flicker without fully eliminating the problem. The actual ranges of each anti-flicker mode are different between the models. On Asus, middle sets the minimum to 120Hz and high sets it to 210Hz. On the Gigabyte, medium is an 80Hz minimum and high is 160Hz. In both cases, only medium/middle preserves low frame rate compensation with an effective 0 to 280Hz range, so I wouldn't use the highest modes. A 120Hz minimum is a little better than an 80Hz minimum in terms of reducing the VRR range and flicker, so Asus get a small win here, but in practice it's not a huge difference. There aren't too many differences in the port selection across each monitor. All feature one DisplayPort 1.4 with DSC, two HDMI 2.1 ports at 48 gigabits per second, and a 2-port USB-A 5 gigabits per second hub. Only the Gigabyte models offer a USB-C input with 18 watts of power delivery and a KVM switch. None have built-in speakers and all have an audio output jack. LG's model specifically has a 4-pole jack for combined audio and mic input, plus they offer DTS-X headphone support. The Asus model is the only one that uses an internal power supply. The other models require an external power brick. In terms of functionality, I think the Gigabyte models offer the best connectivity. The USB-C input is handy for hooking up laptops or handhelds, and while it doesn't have a particularly good power delivery, at least it actually has USB-C. The KVM switch could also come in handy if you hook up the monitor to multiple PCs. SDR Performance is next up. Tandem WOLED is the brightest OLED technology we currently have for desktop SDR use, with all 4 models achieving at least 325 nits full screen white, which is close to entry-level IPS LCD levels. The Gigabyte MO27Q28G is a bit of an outlier in that it produced 368 nits compared to 325 to 335 nits for all the other Tandem WOLEDs I've tested. I suspect I have an outlier sample that performs a bit better than average based on comparing my results to other reviewers. The Gigabyte and LG models implement uniform brightness by default, so brightness stays constant regardless of window size or overall screen APL. On the Asus model, uniform brightness is an option you have to enable. Minimum brightness is decent, with all models falling in the 20 to 35 nit range. Out-of-the-box grayscale accuracy is quite similar on all 4 models, with a Delta E performance in the 7 to 9 range. All exhibit similar gamma, and color temperature is close to accurate across the board. Color checker performance is even closer, as all models provide the full wide gamut by default in SDR content, and all have the same 84% coverage of Rec 2020. Where I started to see some separation was comparing each model's sRGB modes, which are the most accurate ways to use the monitor in SDR. In grayscale, the Gigabyte matte model and the LG produce the best performance, though the Asus model isn't too far behind. The weakest performance is seen with the MO27Q28GR, which has elevated gamma compared to the other models. In color checker, the Gigabyte MO27Q28G retains a strong position with great accuracy, and the Asus model performs well too. However, the LG model falls a bit behind the others. That's due to some issues with blue accuracy, though it still outperforms the MO27Q28GR overall. There's a few other things to consider outside of how these monitors perform out of the box. The Gigabyte models are the most restrictive in their color controls. The sRGB mode, for example, is locked down, so you can't adjust white balance in that mode, only brightness. The LG is less restrictive, allowing white balance changes, while the Asus model implements a color gamut toggle that preserves full functionality. For that reason, combined with solid all-round results, I think the Asus XG27AQ-WMG has the best SDR performance. However, one of the unique features the LG model offers is hardware calibration. When you hook up the monitor over USB and use LG's calibration software combined with the supported colorimeter, you can calibrate the screen and upload those results directly into the monitor's scaler. This gives you a more accurate experience without having to worry about software profiles, which aren't compatible with all applications. The way this calibration mode works isn't perfect and you don't always get full accuracy, but it's a great feature to have if you prioritize accuracy and already own calibration hardware. When I compare HDR performance across OLED monitors that use the same panel, I tend to find they all offer similar or even identical results. That's broadly true for these Tandem WOLEDs as well, but there are some differences here and there that are worth exploring. 1440p Tandem WOLED tends to provide 2 base HDR configurations, a mode with lower peak brightness and a mode with higher peak brightness. Most people will want to use the higher peak brightness mode, as the low configuration doesn't exceed 600 nits, though it can be a bit more accurate than the high configuration. On the LG, enabling the high mode is straightforward. You change the sensibly named peak brightness setting to high. I'd also recommend using the Gamer 2 preset with color temperature set to warm. On the Asus, you can get there by increasing brightness to 100 in the console HDR mode, and on the Gigabyte, you need to remain in the base HDR mode and then go into the OLED Care options and change APL stabilize to high. I'm not sure why Gigabyte hide the best configuration in this way, but these are the optimal settings in my opinion. Something that you guys also like to know is how many settings you can change in the HDR mode, as some monitors lock you out of a ton of controls. LG gives you access to brightness and some color temperature options, so you can dim the HDR experience if you find it too bright, which is separate to the peak brightness control, which only changes the maximum level of brightness output. Asus also allow you to adjust most settings, including brightness and white balance, provided you enable the adjustable HDR toggle. Gigabyte are again the most restrictive. Some modes, like the default HDR mode, block all settings, including brightness. Other modes have access to some settings like brightness and contrast, but none allow you to change white balance. The unfortunate thing here is the HDR mode is the most accurate mode, so if you did want to dim the HDR experience, you'd have to switch to something like HDR Game or HDR Movie and sacrifice a bit from accuracy. When each monitor is set to its best HDR mode with peak brightness on high, accuracy is broadly similar. Here we're looking at EOTF charts, which show what the monitor outputs when content requests a specific brightness level. A 2% window with constant APL 18 simulates darker scenes, and here the Gigabyte and Asus models are very similar in how they handle content below 80 nits of brightness, such as shadow and mid-tone detail. They're pretty accurate. However, the LG model has noticeable black crush in the bottom 5% of the HDR range. This affects dark shadow detail below 0.3 nits and makes it harder to see things in very dark content. All four models also over-brighten bright elements within dark scenes, so think lights illuminating a dark street at night. This can double or even triple the brightness in some situations, so a light that's supposed to be 300 nits could be 900 nits on some models. As this over-brightening only affects some parts of the scene, dark scenes for the most part look decent with good punch and good shadows, but it's not perfectly accurate. In comparison, we've seen some OLEDs come with modes that just boost the brightness of everything. Those modes look bad and also raise shadows. What these Tandem WOLEDs offer in the HDR mode is not that sort of over-brightening. In bright scenes, simulated here with a 10% window APL50 test, all of these Tandem WOLEDs offer decent performance. The Gigabyte models are the most accurate, though the Asus and LG models get pretty close to what I want to see. The one exception here is again the LG model has black crush, so this applies regardless of whether we're looking at a bright or dark scene. Shadow detail can be problematic on that model. Lastly, we have HDR color performance. The LG model has slightly undersaturated colors, whereas the Asus and Gigabyte models look normal. The XG27AQ-WMG delivers the most accurate colors in the HDR mode, though again, all have a similar color space and color volume. In full screen HDR brightness, once again, my Gigabyte MO27Q28G sample slightly outperformed the others, although a typical result between 320 and 340 nits is very decent. There is some variance in the 10% window results. The Asus and LG models achieve over 730 nits, whereas the Gigabyte models are more in the high 600 nit range. Then for 2% window brightness, the MO27Q28G was again the brightest of the models I tested, pushing up to 1484 nits. The other three models came in close to 1300 nits peak, which seems to be a more typical figure for a Tandem WOLED monitor. All of these results are higher than what you'd get from a QD-OLED at this size and resolution. In real scene brightness, looking at the brightest modes, again, the MO27Q28G comes out on top, but I wouldn't read too much into that, as I suspect I've gotten a particularly bright unit. The 27GX900A, MO27Q28GR, and XG27AQ-WMG end up with similar real scene results, averaging around 540 nits. There are some differences from test to test, but on the whole, these panels deliver a bright experience with no panel dimming. Competing QD-OLEDs, even in their brightest modes, typically offer below 500 nits average real scene brightness, making Tandem WOLED at least 10% brighter and up to 30% brighter in some tests. OLED Care features and warranties are important on WOLED monitors due to their risk of burn-in. Gigabyte and Asus offer 3-year warranties that include burn-in coverage, which is the industry standard. However, LG only offer a 2-year warranty, and their warranty wording makes it less clear whether burn-in is covered. LG have claimed to us and other media outlets that burn-in is covered as part of their warranty, but even if that were the case, a 2-year warranty isn't as good as a 3-year warranty that the other brands offer. LG also falls behind in OLED Care features and options. They offer a very basic collection of settings, just screen move and screen saver, plus the ability to manually run a cleaning cycle. On the Asus model, you have 6 different OLED Care toggles plus the screen move option, and on the Gigabyte there's 5 toggles plus screen move. This gives you a bit more control on the Asus and Gigabyte models over some of the screen dimming features that can potentially be annoying. In addition, the Asus model is the only version with a proximity sensor that can detect when you are sitting in front of the display, switching the screen off when you're not physically there. This helps to prevent burn-in by not pointlessly activating the OLED pixels when the screen isn't in use. It has adjustable timing and sensitivity settings, and in my testing it just works really well. If you leave your seat, it turns the screen off after a few minutes, sit back down and it instantly turns back on. It's also an optional feature, you don't have to use it, and it comes disabled by default. The major downside to Tandem WOLED monitors is dark grey uniformity. This specific panel type suffers from an issue known as grey banding, an inherent flaw with the technology at the hardware level. All Tandem WOLED monitors suffer from this problem, whether you get the Asus, Gigabyte or LG model, and it's a lottery as to how badly the screen will be affected. In a lot of cases, the unit you get will probably be fine, but in some outliers the issue is really bad. No one model is specifically more affected than others, so you can't choose your way out of it. I don't like how this issue is a panel lottery that in the worst cases will require several RMAs to get a good unit. LG Display need to tighten up quality control and also probably just fix this issue. I'd much prefer buyers could just grab a Tandem WOLED and use it in peace without having to worry about banding. Unfortunately, the reality is that when buying any of the 4 models, you might get one with particularly prominent grey banding. None of the 4 units I tested had particularly bad dark grey banding. Here are some examples I captured of what the screen looks like in real life on the Gigabyte MO27Q28GR and the Asus XG27AQWMG. It is there if you view dark grey uniform images, but in actual gameplay, even HDR games with dark scenes, I found it pretty difficult to spot. To me at least, it's especially difficult to spot in environmental conditions that aren't pitch black, as complete darkness tends to accentuate the banding. But that's not to say that grey banding won't be an issue on the model that you buy. Hopefully it's not an issue, and I know it can be a relatively minor issue in the best cases, but I can't be sure of that. The last thing to discuss is the design and build quality. The aesthetics of each monitor are subjective, of course, but there are some practical elements to each design that improve usability. For example, the LG and Asus models have a completely flat metal stand base which uses up minimal desk space and allows you to put items on top of it. The Gigabyte model also uses a small metal base, but it has a slight bump in it that makes it harder to put some larger items on it. The LG model has ports that face directly out on the rear, which makes accessing them very easy compared to the Asus and Gigabyte models. LG also provide the best ergonomic control, as the stand elevates the screen to a maximum height of 58 cm compared to 53 cm with the Gigabyte and 50 cm with the Asus. All models offer tilt, swivel and pivot adjustment as well. That extra height is genuinely handy, as at least for me the Asus model sits a little too low on my desk, whereas the LG gets to a height that I feel is just right. Visually, all 4 models have a similar bezel size on the front, which is even on all 4 sides, something I appreciate as it looks quite pleasing. They're also all darker designs. No white models are available just yet. The Asus and Gigabyte are best described as dark grey, while the LG's medium-ish grey has a slight purple tint. You'll find RGB LED lighting on the LG model as 2 strips on either side, and on the Asus model inside the logo on the rear, but there's no RGB LED lighting on the Gigabyte. All models have decent build quality in my opinion, and I don't have a strong preference for which design I like the most. I think overall I like the stand of the Gigabyte models the most with its thin metal pillar, and maybe the rear of the LG model is my favourite, plus I do like the flat base on the LG and Asus. All look pretty good, and you get that thin OLED design. All models also use a directional toggle to control the built-in OSD, aside from some of the things I've already mentioned like unlocked color controls, anti-flicker modes and OLED Care features. There's not a lot of other standout things that each model offers. You get crosshair, shadow boosting and an FPS counter on all 4 models. The Gigabyte and Asus do offer a few additional gaming features, but nothing crazy. So that's how the 4 currently available 1440p 280Hz Tandem WOLED monitors compare. I still think this is the best 1440p OLED panel on the market at the moment, so it's definitely worth considering one of these monitors for your gaming setup. Now I know this opinion annoys some people because of the whole dark grey banding issue, which admittedly is a very annoying flaw with these panels. But QD-OLED has its own set of flaws like ambient light reflectivity, the grey-purple tint, and bright HDR scene panel dimming. So overall, I tend to prefer what Tandem WOLED offers, especially if you get a good unit with minimal banding. But unfortunately, of course, there's no flawless OLED panel for gaming right now. So which Tandem WOLED is best? This is a difficult call to make because all 4 offer similar performance. The one big call you have to make, and it's subjective, I can't make it for you, is whether you want a matte or glossy coating. I personally prefer the glossy finish on these WOLEDs, so I'd lean towards either the Asus XG27AQWMG or the Gigabyte MO27Q28GR. But if you want matte, then the LG 27GX700A or the Gigabyte non-R model will be the best options. In the matte category, I think this is relatively straightforward. The Gigabyte model typically outperforms the LG model. I didn't like the black crush in the HDR mode on the LG, which isn't an issue on the Gigabyte. The Gigabyte also offers more OLED Care options and a longer 3-year warranty, better connectivity with a USB-C port and KVM switch, and some handy gaming features like an anti-flicker mode. With both models typically costing $600 US, I'd go with the Gigabyte. But that's not to say the LG model doesn't have strengths. I like the inclusion of hardware calibration, more unlocked color controls across the SDR and HDR modes, and the taller stand with a flatter base. If this model is a great price in your region or you specifically like something about its feature set, by all means get it. Just be aware of some of its downsides that maybe aren't present on its competitors. The Glossy category is more competitive. The Gigabyte and Asus models are a better match on features and performance. Both have black frame insertion and an anti-flicker mode. Both don't have dark crush issues, and both have similar sets of OLED Care features with the same 3-year warranty. So to pick a winner here, I really have to go deep into the differences. The Asus model is a little more accurate in the SDR mode than the Gigabyte and offers better unlocked color controls. HDR performance is very similar, the Gigabyte a little stronger with EOTF tracking, the Asus a little stronger with colors. It's easier to customize HDR color performance on the Asus. There's also the additional Neo proximity sensor that you get with the Asus model. There's no alternative to that on the Gigabyte. However, the Gigabyte offers USB-C and a KVM switch, which the Asus doesn't have. Based on all of that, it's a bit of a wash, though I'd give a very narrow victory overall to the Asus ROG Strix XG27AQ WMG overall. The color controls and proximity sensor getting it over the line. But then comes the issue of the price. The Gigabyte model is 8% cheaper at $600 US compared to $650 US for the Asus. Even though the Asus model is slightly better, I don't think the differences are large enough to justify spending an extra $50. So overall, for the best bang for buck, I'd pick the Gigabyte MO27Q28GR, assuming pricing is similar in your region. Here in Australia, the Gigabyte model is $900, while the Asus is $1,200, so an even larger gap that puts the Gigabyte further ahead. So that's pretty much it for this one. If you're interested in any of these monitors, you can check current pricing and purchase them via the links in the description below. If you want to support Monitors Unboxed and all the independent testing that we do, please consider signing up to our Patreon page. Links are also in the description to that. If you sign up, you get access to some pretty cool benefits, like the calibrated settings and ICC profiles that we generate for all of our monitors that we test. We've also got our Discord community, great place to get any additional feedback, ask some questions about monitors, great community of people in there helping people out. So anyway, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.